Hey, how's it going? Today I want to talk to you about web scraping. I want to show you how easy it is to get started. By the time you're done with this video, you're going to have all the fundamentals that you need to extract virtually any data that you want from any publicly accessible website. Now, once you have this skill set, think about the possibilities that it's going to open up for you. For example, you could virtually automate any kind of searching that you're doing online. Like maybe you're looking for a job post that matches your specific criteria. Maybe you're planning for a trip, looking for flights for hotels. Maybe you're looking for a price drop on a specific product. What if you could delegate that work to a script that you run automatically and just produces you the results and maybe sends you notifications? That's what I'm going to show you in this video. We're going to use Playwright. Playwright is a web automation tool. A lot of people actually use it for end-to-end testing, which has a lot of the same goals, right? Like you write a script to basically automate working with a website. So those same APIs that we would use for testing, you can actually also use for web scraping. So maybe let's talk about what we're going to do in this video specifically. I was thinking that we could do a flight search. Currently, I'm on United Airlines, united.com. And when you go to their homepage, they have this small form here where you can provide the airport you're coming from, the destination, and then there's a date picker. And we could have Playwright basically fill out this form and then click Find Flights. Then once we get to the results page, you'll see that it's going to list out a bunch of flights, a bunch of prices, and this is the page that we're actually going to extract data from. I actually have an example file output for you here, the results.json. You can see that we have an array of flights, and our script can even take screenshots. So if you want to have like actual visual pictures of the browser as you're working with it, our script can do that. So this is actually a snapshot of a results page that we extracted this data from. So you can see if you look closely, this first flight here is exactly the same as the first row over here. Now before we get started, I need to quickly talk about the biggest blocker to web scraping, which is that a lot of websites nowadays will try to prevent it. So for example, if a website thinks that you're possibly a bot, they're going to block your IP address. Or sometimes you might have seen things like CAPTCHAs where it makes you select, where's the car in this grid, and you have to, prove that you're not a robot. Those are the problems that are kind of hard to work around. And that brings me to the sponsor of this video, Bright Data. Now, Bright Data is a company that revolves around creating solutions to make web scraping significantly easier. They have this massive proxy network so that you don't have to worry about getting your own personal IP address getting blocked. I mentioned CAPTCHA solving. They have a tool for that. There's also a lot of different ways that they help you with web scraping. So for example, maybe you don't want to write code at all. They actually have data sets that, they scrape themselves that you can actually just get from them. So if you want to start from just the data, maybe you're more of a data scientist, you can just get data sets. They have several scraping solutions. One interesting one is the Web Scraper IDE. It's sort of like VS Code, but specifically for, web scraping. And the nice thing about this is that you can pull in templates for a lot of popular websites. For example, you can see here, they have Amazon, YouTube, Walmart, Zillow, Booking.com. And you can start from that template and just manipulate it a little bit to get exactly what you need. So if you want to get started quickly, that's another option. Now for our case specifically, what we're going to use is what they're calling the scraping browser. The best way that I could explain the scraping browser is basically if we weren't using Bright Data, we could still use Playwright to initiate a browser and then connect to that browser and then, do our attempted web scraping. But like I said, that browser is running in our local network, in our own machine, which again can be blocked. But if we instead were able to connect to a remote browser that's living inside Bright Data's infrastructure, their massive proxy network, then we're basically protecting ourselves from getting blocked. And that's exactly what the scraping browser is all about. So go ahead and go to brightdata.com if you want to try it out. They have free trials in there. When you log in, you're going to see a page like this, which says view proxy products. And this is where you're going to see all the different options that you have. But specifically, we are going to be using the scraping browser. When you get to this page, it's going to show you the credentials that you need to connect to the scraping browser. So the host username and password, and we're going to provide that as environment variables to our script later. All right, so let's go ahead and start writing our script. In a terminal, I recommend creating a new directory. For example, you can do make dir scrape. Once you're in there, you can do npm init and it's going to ask you a couple questions. You can just hit enter in every single one of these, and that should generate us a very basic package.json. Okay, so you should have a package.json that looks like this. We do need to install a few dependencies. We just need async retry and Playwright, so make sure to npm install that in the terminal. We also need to modify this to have type module, which if you're not familiar is going to make us work with ES modules, which just allows us to have a nicer import export syntax and also things like top level await. Next, we're going to replace this test script with a start script. So all this start script is doing is really running node on an index.js. So we do need to create an index.js in our file system, and this is where our script is going to live. And you'll also notice that there is a --env file in here, which is where we're going to provide our scraping browser credentials. So you can see I already have a .env file in here, but I created an example for you to show you what that will look like. So you're going to have username, password, and host, and you're going to grab these values from the Bright Data website. All right, so in our index.js file, we're going to import Playwright. We're also going to create a URL that we're going to use to connect to our scraping browser, and that's going to use our username, our password, and our host. Right, so we're going to use that in a second here, but first we're going to set up a function. Let's just call this main, and this main function is basically where our scraping code is going to live, right? So when we run index.js, we're really just running main. So a couple different approaches here. You can do something like this, which just runs main, and then if there's an error, we'll exit. However, a slightly better approach, I think, is to add an automatic retry to this. So that's why we installed async retry, which we're also going to import up here. So instead of doing this, we're just going to do await retry. We're going to provide main in there as a function to run, and then you can provide a number for how many times you want it to retry if it fails, right? And the purpose of this is just to make our script a little bit more resilient to failures. All right, at this point, we can actually start connecting to our scraping browser. So the way to do that is we're going to do browser equals await playwright or pw.chromium.connect over CDP. And this is where we provide that URL that we constructed up here. CDP is the Chrome DevTools protocol, right? You can see that it says it attaches Playwright to an existing browser instance using that protocol. I also personally like adding console logs throughout the script so that I know, if it fails, where exactly it failed. So I'm going to add a console log here of just saying connecting to scraping browser. And once we're connected, we can create a new page off of that. At this point, we can actually start working off of this page object and basically, start interacting with the browser. So what I'm going to do is await page.goto, and we're going to united.com, the US website. I'm also going to provide a time right here, which I believe if you don't provide it, it'll just indefinitely try to connect. So we at least will allow it to time out if for some reason there's a connection problem. And then I'll add another console log here just to say that we've navigated to that URL, and now we can start scraping the browser. All right, so at this point, I just want to verify that we're actually able to connect to our scraping browser in Bright Data and actually be able to navigate to the United Airlines website. So I'm just going to take a screenshot of the page once we get there. So the way to do that is to await page.screenshot. You could provide a path param here for the file name. I'm just going to do page.png. And I'm also going to do full page true. And that's just going to make sure that if the page is really long, it's just going to take a screenshot of the whole thing. And then at the end of our script, we're just going to close the browser, and that should complete our initial script. So on the right, I'm just going to do npm start. Remember, we made a script for that in package.json. And there you go. You can see that our script finished. And if we go to our file explorer, there should be a page.png there. And if we zoom in, you can see that this is the United Airlines website, right? And now we know that we can connect. We can start actually scraping. Now, there's a few improvements that I want to add in right away. I want to be able to take screenshots, but also provide a nice log every time I do those screenshots. So I'm going to introduce a take screenshot method here, which just takes in the page, which is going to do that same exact screenshot that we did, right? So it's just going to log and screenshot together. That way we can replace things like this to be take screenshot of the page and then some kind of log. Basically, we're going to take screenshot at multiple steps in our script. That way we can kind of get a visual of what does the browser currently look like as we're working with it, since we can't see it, right? It's remote. I also want to wrap this in a try catch actually, where we're going to move our scraping code inside the try after we're able to connect. Within our catch block, what I'm going to do is take a screenshot. That way every time our script fails, I'll get a screenshot of what the page looks like, and then I'm just going to rethrow that error. Then finally, I do want to close the browser for whether or not it completes. So at this point, we have a script that gets to this web page. What we need to tell Playwright is to basically, hey, find me this form, and actually type into these fields. So for example, in the from, we wanted to type in something like New York, and it's going to bring up suggested results, and we're going to ask Playwright to select JFK or any of these airports. And then similarly, we wanted to be able to search for perhaps Orlando and select MCO, right? And we'll talk about the rest here, but fundamentally, first thing we need to do is to just be able to interact with a page. How do we do that? Well, before you can interact, you need to be able to locate elements on the page. So you can see with Playwright, they have this locators API, which basically gives you a couple built-in locators. For example, maybe you're trying to find a button. You can do get by role button, and then the text that's on that button. And then once you have that element, you can do actions on it like click. There's also get by label, which is, if an input has a label on it, right? Think of it as visually. If you're trying to find an input box, you'll probably first scan for the label, right? It works a lot like testing library in React if you ever use that. Same thing you can use if it doesn't have a label, you can use placeholder, get by placeholder, and it's going to get you the input that has that placeholder. Right? Pretty simple. And get by text is your most generic way to search for anything visual on the page with a given text. So again, in our website, we're trying to select these input boxes. How do we do that? We can see that it has this like floating label of from star. So we probably can use get by label from star here, right? And one of the things that you can do is, you can inspect it. So if I were to target that input box directly, you can see in the source code, it also has a placeholder with that same text, right? So you can also do get by placeholder from star. Let's give that a shot. So in the code, I'm going to do get by placeholder from star, and I'm going to fill that with New York. Fill is basically the same as like type it in, right? And then remember from the website, it's going to give us an autocomplete of options once you type in. By the way, just a really quick note, this is why the scraping browser from Bright Data is so useful, because it allows Playwright to engage with a page in order to actually pull in more data than what was previously on the DOM, right? Like for example, previously we didn't have options of the airports in a DOM. We type into the page and it gives us the autocomplete box, which we can select items from. And that's only possible because of this integration with the scraping browser and using Playwright against that. And we need to look into what exactly are these? How do I select this so that I can click it? So let's gonna go ahead and inspect that as well. And we're gonna see that this is actually a button. So all we need to do is really tell Playwright to find a button that says JFK in it and click that. Right, pretty straightforward. So we're gonna do await page.getByRole. In our case, we're gonna do button, and we're gonna say I want the one that says JFK. So again, once you have the element, you're able to locate it. You can interact with it using actions. We're gonna do click. All right, next we're gonna do the exact same thing, but we're gonna do it on 2. We're gonna fill it with Orlando, and we're gonna select MCO. And then after this, we need to select our flight dates. But just to take a pause, we're going to take a screenshot, log it out, just to see how our scraper is doing so far. So back in the terminal, we're going to do npm start. And there you go, it completed. We're at the point where it's about to select dates. Let's take a look at what our screenshot looks like. Our form now looks like this. It entered JFK and MCO, so it's able to, select our destination. Anyway, so back to the browser. We wanted to basically click on this. And we have a couple of different options. This is actually still an input box, so we could just like try to type in here like Jan 6, that might work. But instead, what I want to actually do is have it click on this and then have it actually select a specific date from the date picker. So again, we need to inspect what is this element, and you can see that each of these dates is actually a TD. However, it has the role of a button, right? And it also has ARIA label, and then it has the full date in there. So I just need to basically query something that either has a role button that has 15 in it, although that's a little bit tricky because you have multiple 15s in here, right? So instead we want to query something that has the label January 15 or any other specific date. So let's go ahead and try that. So to target the input box that has the dates in it, I'm actually going to find the one that says depart, and I'm just going to click on it instead of filling it out. At this point, we know that the date picker should be open, and we can do something like get by label January 26, right? And it's only going to show the current year, so you know that we don't have to provide the full text here. Let's do January 26th to January 30th, right? And that's gonna fill in our dates. And at this point, once you select the dates, you pretty much have enough to submit, right? Like we just need to click find flights. But if you're following along, you can further extend your script to, select one of these options or perhaps change travelers, right? I'm just doing the simplest example here of let's pick the airport, the dates, and then we're gonna click find flights. So what I'm gonna do at this point is I'm gonna log and screenshot again to say that we're about to submit. Then we're gonna do get by role button that has the name find flights, and we're gonna click it, and that's gonna trigger a submit. Now at this point in the script, we need a way to tell if are we actually in the results page or not, right? Because when you hit submit, it'll take a couple seconds for it to actually search for results, right? Like you'll see a skeleton page. So back on the website, let's take a look at what happens if I do find flights. It's gonna go into the skeleton page, and once it's actually finished loading, you'll see that there is this depart on. So that can tell me that the page is ready if the depart on is on the page. So what we can perhaps do is do await page.getByText. I'm just gonna find a text that says depart on. And real quick, by the way, if you actually look at the HTML page, there's actually two things in here that says depart on, and it doesn't really matter which one we select. However, Playwright is gonna fail when it finds more than one element for the thing that you're looking for. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna do first, which is just gonna get me the first element that it finds, which is all I need. I just need to know that that's on the page. We're not gonna do anything with it. So that's fine. And then wait for is just a generic thing to say, hey, wait for this to show up. But this is another good spot for us to log and take a screenshot. But this time we're going to do results loaded, right? So if our script is working correctly at this point, we should get to the page that actually gives us the flights. And then we can work off of that to scrape data. So we're going to do npm start. If you want to, you can actually open up that page.png, and as it's taking a screenshot, it's just going to automatically update for you. So this kind of gives you a window of like what does the browser currently look like, right? So you can see that it's already filled out our from and the dates. It's loading the results, and there you go, our script completed. It says results loaded, took a screenshot, and now our screenshot looks like this. It's actually the results. So we're almost at the finish line. We know that our script is able to get to this page, right? We got a screenshot of it. Now we just need to understand how can we query this grid of flights here so that we can construct a data set out of that, right? So how do we extract it? We need to do a little bit of inspection. We can use the Chrome Tools selector here, and let me just try to find what this is. So I can see that, if I find this element, if I move just a little bit higher, it's wrapped around this div that has a role or row, right? Makes a lot of sense. So every single one of these has a div that has a role or row. Keep that in mind, because remember, we can do get by a role, and we're gonna be able to query this entire row if we wanted to. Now let's dig a little bit deeper. Once we have the row, how do we get the individual cells? So if we take a look at a single row, here we go. It's a little bit hard to see, but you can see that within a row, there is a div, that has a row of grid cell that pretty much marks the individual cells within that row, right? So we have this one, and then within this, we also have a bunch of divs with grid cells. Ultimately, we want to be able to construct a data set, right? So let's create an empty array that we're going to fill in as we're extracting data. We said that there's rows, so we're going to query basically all of them. So we're going to do get by a row, and you can actually do .all here, which tells Playwright to get every single one of them. It's going to return an array of those divs that we have. So at this point, to get our data, we're just going to loop through the row and then select the grid cells within that. So we're going to do for const row of rows. And to keep things simple, we're actually going to do a slice here. We'll just do, the first 10 items. Now you might be wondering why start at 1 here. You'll notice that the label row, the one that doesn't actually have the information that we want, also has a row. So this is actually the first item that is going to get queried in our rows, but we want to start it starting at the second row. Now at this point, we know that a row basically represents a flight. So we're going to do const flight, and we'll create an options array in here. And this is going to provide the different pricing options for that given flight, right? So we want to fill in this data basically. So similarly, we mentioned that within a row, there's a bunch of grid cells, and we're going to use that to get each individual item. So we're going to do cells equals await row dot get by row grid cell. And again, this is going to get basically all the cells within that row. So you can kind of think of it as we're doing a nested query within each individual row. Right, so imagine that now we have the cells, each cells, and then to get the data, we're just going to loop through that again. And I want to actually check for the index here. So I'm going to do index cell of cells dot entries. And why is that? Why do we want to know the index? Because on the site, if you remember, the very first box is like the flight details. So we know that the first one is the only one that has like the airport, the time, the duration. So we need to do if index is 0, we need to parse the flight information off of that. Otherwise, we're going to parse the pricing information for the other cells. But first, we need a way to extract text out of each cell. So we're going to do cell text equals await cell.all inner texts. And you can see that this returns a promise of a string array. So I only really want the first item in there. And let's go ahead and log out what this cell text looks like so that you can understand how we're going to go about parsing that information to actually put it into our data set. So at this point, we need to run our script again. So terminal npm start. All right, so I just fast forward a little bit here, and you can see that it is starting to log out the results in the terminal. And you can kind of use this to infer how we're going to extract the data, right? We just need to know like what each of these lines are. So let's think about some intuitions that we can get out of this. First of all, cell text is actually just one long string, right? So for example, this entire thing is pretty much one string. It just has a new line character at the end of every single one of these, right? So, but this is one string, right? That's one cell text. So in order for us to get the individual things, we just need to split up the cell text on the places that it goes into a new line, right? Like if we were to turn this into an array, then based on the placement of the string, we'll know what data we're working with. So let me show you what that looks like. So if we were to do const lines, and then we're just going to take cell text and split it at the new line character, and then we have these as an array. So we said that the flight information only exists on the first cell. So that's why we have index earlier. So we're going to do index if it's 0. It's the first one. We can start filling in our flight details. So we're going to do flight dot is nonstop. How do we know if it's nonstop? Basically, if the second item here says nonstop, right? Pretty simple. So we're just going to do lines at position 1 equals nonstop. So this is going to turn into a Boolean. Similarly, for the other things, line 2 here is the time that it's departing at. And then we probably want to get the airport that it's departing from, which is actually a little bit down here, right? So the EWR. So departs from is actually at position 6. And then same thing for arrival information. The time that it arrives is at position 4. And the airport is at position 10, right? So this is MCO at position 10. The duration of the flight is at position 8. So that's this 2 hours, 59 minutes, right? So that's just for the first cell. The rest of the cells are pretty simple. We're just going to do options dot push. And remember, we're running this for each cell, right? So if we take a look at what the rest of the cells look like, so the rest of them looks like this, which basically the cost is the second item. So if we were to add the cost to each option, we just need to do lines 1. And then we need to determine, really what type of flight this is. For example, there's United Economy, Basic Economy, Regular Economy, Economy Plus, Business Flight. Now, what we can do is you'll notice that this is always showing up in a certain order. So within ourselves, we know that the first one with the cost here is Basic Economy, followed by Economy, Economy that's refundable, Economy Plus, and then Business. And having that information, we can just create a map of types. Maybe up here, I'm just going to add flight type. So this is going to represent what each of the cells are. So we're just going to do down here, we're going to do type, flight type, and I'm just going to decide what to print here based on their index. Right, so all throughout this, what we've been doing is basically filling in a flight object that we eventually want to push into our data set. So at the end of this for loop, we're just going to do data.push flight. And our expectation is that at the end of this, data has all of the flights that we selected. In this case, it's just going to be the first 10 items here. And then if you want to, you can do another screenshot here of the page just to get the final result. And then, another thing you can do is you can write the results to a file, right? Just to complete the example in OJS, you can just use the FS module. We're going to use the promises version of that. And to wrap things up, we're just going to write a file, results.json. We're going to put the data in there and then console log that we've completed. At this point, our script should be complete. So let's do one more final run through. Back to the terminal, npm start. All right, so we can see in the terminal that the script completed, results.json was created. If we take a look at the file, it'll look like this. You should have an array of flights with information of, is it nonstop, where is it departing from, and where is it arriving, and then the different cost options that you have. All right, so now we have data. Where do we go from here? And really at this point, what happens next is up to you. Once you have data, you can do all sorts of stuff with it. For example, you could take our script and put it into a cron job and have it run, every day, every hour, however much you want. And then as it creates this data set, you can create alerts. For example, maybe I want to add, like, if I see a flight that's less than $200, notify me, right? If I want to find like the best deal from that. So again, whatever happens next is it's up to you, up to your use case. But the fundamentals that you need to take away from this video is that you can do this for any website. It doesn't have to be flights. You just need to connect, and then you need to navigate. You need to interact with forms, probably. Playwright is really good at that. Perform actions, click on things. And then once you get to the page that you want, you can just write a little bit of JavaScript to parse data out of that page. And that's basically web scraping in a nutshell. So hopefully you learned a lot from this video. Let me know in the comments what you think. But yeah, anyways, this wraps up the video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.